Good evening. My name is Angela Pinalia, and I'm the Artistic Director for Docs in Progress. We're so thrilled to be partnering with filmmaker Jason Green, Blackrock Center for the Arts, and the Pleasant View Historical Association to bring you this screening tonight and this Q&A. Before we get started with the panel, there's a chat box which you guys are already using. Fantastic. Please keep putting in comments and asking your questions. Now, we have an initiative here at Docs called Dinner and a Doc, which is part of a community effort to bring attention and support to local restaurants. This month, John Silky has generously sponsored 2 gift certificates to Spice Street Indian Restaurant in Silver Spring. There's one for $40 and another one for $25, and we're going to be randomly picking 2 winners at the end of the Q&A, so stick around for that. Now I'd like to bring up on screen Kayla Mitchell, the Artistic Director at Blackrock Center for the Arts. She has a few welcoming words. Hi, Keelan.
Thank you so much, Angela. Hey, everybody. Good evening. It is a true joy and honor to be here tonight, and we are so thankful that you're taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedules and evening to join us. As Angela mentioned, my name is Kayla Mitchell. I serve as the Artistic Director at Blackrock Center for the Arts right here in Germantown, Maryland. I've had the honor of project managing the Finding Fellowship series, working alongside our incredible partners, Jason Green, the Pleasant View Historical Association, Docs in Progress, and Blackrock's incredible education and marketing departments led by Katie Hecklinger and Amanda Moskowitz, and with the continued support by Blackrock's fabulous CEO, Lynn Arndt. For those who may not know, Blackrock opened in 2002, which means we are nearing our 20th anniversary next year, which is really exciting. And we have some really exciting things planned. So you guys got to make sure you're following us and checking out our newsletter for that. We serve as the leading venue for performing arts, visual arts, and arts education in Upper Montgomery County. And last March, when the world turned upside down due to COVID, we turned our main art gallery into the Up County Consolidation Hub, led fearlessly by Grace Rivera Oven and her sensational team, and now serves approximately 1,000 families in need every week. It's pretty incredible. And if you're interested in supporting that and learning more about the hub, you can check it out at blackrockcenter.org. Now, in addition to this incredible online viewing of the Finding Fellowship film and tonight's Q&A, this series also includes a filmmaking workshop for students ages 13 to 17, which runs March 9th through April 1st. Go ahead and put that in your calendars. The workshop is titled In Your Backyard and is inspired by the storytelling and history that Jason and his family have documented so beautifully in the Finding Fellowship film. We really want students to find inspiration and document the stories and history of their own neighborhoods and backyards, which will ultimately result in a final 2-minute documentary style film project. And the workshop is led by Docs in Progress teaching artist Kine Bonner, and enrollment is still open and available. You can register right now. And we do have scholarship opportunities. We don't want anybody to miss out. For students who cannot participate in the workshop, we will be offering an opportunity to students to create these films at home on their own. So check out blackrockcenter.org/finding-fellowship for more information. And lastly, the big shebang, we close out the series with an online reception and fundraising event on April 11th at 2 p.m. April 11th at 2 p.m. Put it in your calendars. I know you have your phones in front of you. The event is titled, so beautifully, it's titled Too Precious to Lose. And it's a celebration of the film, but also an opportunity to continue raising funds for the preservation and restoration of the church and schoolhouse. We also love any opportunity to bring together fabulous community leaders like Josh Dubois and Mike Muse. They will be there, as well as highlighting some musical performances and some of the student film projects. You can go to blackrockcenter.org, doers.org/finding-fellowship to RSVP right now. It is totally free. And there are links there also if you'd like to continue to support the Pleasant View Historical Association and Blackrock Center for the Arts, and also check out more information about Docs in Progress. I will now pass the baton back to Angela. Thank you all so much for your time and continued support of the Finding Fellowship series. It has truly only just begun. Today, this week, is our first event of the series, so please keep on sharing with family and friends. And I will see you all again at the end of the Q&A. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Keelan. All right, so let's get this started. I'd like to bring on our moderator for this evening, Troy Body. He's the Director of Equity Initiatives Unit at Montgomery County Public Schools. Hi, Troy.
Good evening.
Good evening. We also have Reverend Jerry Green. He said I could call him Jerry, from the Pleasant View Historic Site. He's the chairman. Hi, Jerry.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Yes. And then we also have your daughter, right? Keisha Davis.
Yes.
She's a co-producer of the film, Finding Fellowship.
Good evening, everybody.
And then, of course, it's a family affair. Your brother, Jason Green, the director and co-producer of the film. And hi there, Jason. And last but not least, Esther Holman Lyons. She's a Quince Orchard native and a trustee of the Pleasant View Historic Society. Thank you for joining us, Esther.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and I will be leaving you now in good hands.
So good evening, everybody. It is such a pleasure and an honor to be spending Black History Month with you all, and this evening with you all, to talk about your story. So I'm an educator by trade, and one of the things that's so important for students, for all of our students, is to hear stories like these everyday folks who did incredible things. And so I've seen the film several times, and there's so many connections to my community of Sandy Spring. And just to put out there for the audience that don't know, the QO community, the Quince Orchard community, is one of those many Black kinship communities in Montgomery County. And a kinship community are where the majority of where many African Americans live, worship, worked, and attended school. And so when I listened to your story, it just reminded me of these kinship communities and how after we were freed, we wanted to go to church, we wanted to be educated, and we wanted to be able to live, just live our best lives. And so I also appreciate it as a member of the board of the Sandy Springs Slave Museum. And I think, again, how we preserve our stories, our history is so important. And so, again, thank you all for being a part of this, and let's get started. So I'm just, I was just felt accomplished just by starting my family tree. And you all created a whole movie, a film about your family. So let's start off. What was that experience like? What did you learn from it? And then Esther and Reverend Jerry, what was it like to have your story told for millions of people to see? So what was that experience like?
It was a fantastic experience, something that I never thought that I would see in my lifetime. To be able to go back to the school and look at the roots from where I came, and to know that it's all taken down and filmed as something that's going to last forever. It's a joy that brought so much joy to my heart.
I agree with everything that my aunt said. It was a wonderful way for us to look back, to connect with our past, to get a sense of where we've come from, to answer some questions about how this family began, and to get a sense of those who came before us, who had the foresight to save up money and to purchase this land and establish a school and a church. And as a result of that, we have all benefited. It's been a real blessing to get a sense of the courage that those folk had back then in order to do something that has made life better for each and every one of us.
A lot of credit goes to the family. to Aunt Esther, to our grandparents, to our, our Uncle Vernon as our family historian. The basics of the story were there. And I think a lot of times in families that gets lost. And so if we hadn't had that backbone that was read at our family reunion every year, then we wouldn't have had the framework and the skeleton to build the story that Jason has so masterfully built. And so just encouraging families to take every opportunity to pass those stories on. Your kids might not hear it this year, but they'll hear it next year or the year after that. And so, asking the folks, those older, the older folks in the family to share those memories before they get lost. And I think Jason can really speak to a lot of the uncovering and the discovery that he did, just having that, those small nuggets of information that we had from the family that he was able to just really expand on.
Keisha, I think you hit a major theme there, in that point being tell the story and tell the story again and tell the story again, because you never quite know when it's going to hit. Keisha had an experience, Troy, when we were growing up. She actually had breakfast with our grandmother on her way to school all throughout high school. And when I came along, I was too busy doing everything else than sitting down with our grandmother to have breakfast, right? But we had these stories, as Keisha alluded, our Uncle Vernon, our Uncle Tompkins, Aunt Esther, that would share these stories. And it wasn't until I was 33 years old and had what I would call sort of a forcing event. Our grandmother got ill and was in the hospital. And so I forced myself to go and sit with her and heard the stories that Keisha had heard 10, 15 years earlier, 20 years earlier. And so, you got to keep sharing the stories, and at some point it'll sink in. And for me, it was so fortunate that the stories were there. I mean, there was some uncovering that we did, and we can talk about that, but this film rests upon the shoulders of our family members who have preserved this history and told the stories so that we could find it and pick up the ball and continue to run with it.
Absolutely. It's amazing. And I'm looking at the comment, and people are just talking about how much they love the film. And stories is how we keep our ancestors alive, So I know in my story, we talk about Big Mama and B, and folks that I've never met. I've seen them in pictures, but I know them and I feel them. And those stories tell the story of our family and of our history. So let's go back in time a little bit. So what was it like growing up during segregation? And one of the things that stood out to me in the film was that idea of Blacks and white being independent and dependent at the same time. And I just want to hear a little bit more about that. I'm really interested because what I do is equity work, racial equity work for the system. And so there's so much to be learned from the past. So I just want to hear from Esther and Reverend Jerry. What was it like during those times?
During the time that I came up living on Riverford Road, we were the southern house on the left-hand side. We were the only Black family living on that road. We went to a segregated school, but when I played with white kids because they were on my street. They were the only people that I knew, and I knew no different, that I was not supposed to play with them. Our next door neighbors, one on each side of our house, were scared of thunderstorms. So every time it stormed, they would come down to my mother's house and sit with her until the storm was over. And so that's how we got to know each other. But as far as being segregated, I knew no different. I went to a segregated school with all of my friends. I went to a segregated church. I had my white friends who I probably thought that they were Black because they played with me, when I came home in the evening and on the weekend.
So did you ever think it was strange, though, that you all could play together but not go to school together? At
that age, I did not think it was strange.
Right.
It was just something that I accepted. until I got older. Then I started to realize that, no, this is not right. But at that age, I thought, well, they're supposed to go to their school and we're supposed to go to ours.
Yeah, so it was just a normal way of life.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So Reverend Derek, what about you?
So I grew up on Quince Orchard Road. And so in the center of that roadway, which extended about 2 miles, were Black families. And at the end on either side, there were white families. And so most of the Black folk were related to one another. And so we tended to play with one another, go to events with one another. But on occasion, there would be an opportunity for us to do like a football game. And the Black kids would get together and we would go up against the white kids who were there. So there was that type of competition that was taking place. But there was also a sense of bartering that was going on. What I recall is that my father was kind of a jack of all trades. He had skills in carpentry. And there was a family at the end of the road. Their name was Combs. And Mr. Combs had skills in terms of being an auto mechanic. And so although the community was segregated, we could kind of barter. And so if Dad needed some work done on his car, he would take it up to the Combses. If Mr. Combs needed some work done on his house, Dad would go up and he would do that work. It seemed kind of normal. I didn't have a sense of it being segregated. And so went to a segregated school up until the age of when I was going from 4th grade into 5th grade. That's when things seemed to change. And it wasn't a sense of that I was missing out on anything being in the segregated school until the schools were integrated. And then there was a sense of, so this is what a textbook really is supposed to look like in terms of having a book that's in good condition and having access to resources. I remember that transitioning from 4th grade to 5th grade, 4th grade being in an all-Black school, and then the 5th grade going to a school where it was integrated. The difference being that in 4th grade, everybody on the bus going to school, which was in Rockville, was Black. In 5th grade, there were some white students who were on the bus also, and the school was closer. Before, we were traveling 6 miles to Rockville to Rock Terrace. When schools were integrated, we were traveling 2 miles to Darnestown. And then a situation where we started going to school at Travilla. And the condition of the schools themselves was better in that sense. But the interaction, there was some anxiety around that. What's it going to be like going into this school where there are white students there? But I think the benefit that we had was that we had some interaction with the folk who were on the other end of the street.
Got you.
Yeah.
Got you. And that's like one of my deep connections to segregation. My father was a principal at Sandy Spring Elementary doing segregated, when schools were segregated. And growing up on those stories, really, in fact, the painting behind me is just homage to his first 3-room schoolhouse, where he was principal teacher in 1935, I think is when he started. And so I grew up with those stories. And so Keisha and Jason, so by the time we came along, schools were integrated. But how did those stories from your elders kind of shape your world view in a space that was very different from theirs?
You know, I don't know that we heard them in that way at that age. You know, we had seen the Quince Orchard Colored School, and there were events there, and so recognized that was a, place of segregation. I think understood what segregation was as a concept, but growing up in Montgomery County and Quince Orchard area was very diverse. We are a product of Fairhaven, and so the people that we were worshiping with was, a mixed congregation. That's what we saw. And the school that we went to was a mixed school. And so there was an experience that we had. We, grew up here, and then we moved to Anne Arundel County, and it was a Black church in a predominantly Black neighborhood, and I think that's when I kind of understand that difference. Now the school was still integrated and still had a diverse set of friends, but that community change, I think, really highlighted more, what's it like to live in an all Black community and go to an all Black church, and everywhere you look, that's what you see, because that wasn't the experience that we had initially being in the kind of Quince Orchard area.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, one of the things that, is evident in the film, but isn't, underscored that sharply, is that Keisha and I knew that we went to the same elementary school that Dad went to. We didn't know that he integrated it, and that's the function. I remember a white reporter that was interviewing us about the film apologizing for not having these conversations around his dinner table growing up. And I said, we didn't either. In that same fashion, just in that short amount of time, that story, for perhaps a whole host of reasons, was left out of the discourse. And so it's something that we realized, we uncovered, but it's that, I'm reading one of the comments in the chat, and please keep them coming. It's about that, what we recognize through the film process is that the history that we were taught was something that happened in a land long ago in a place far away, right? Like segregation and its desegregation happened in Montgomery, Alabama, but you never learn the part where it happens in Montgomery County, Maryland. And so recognizing that, the desegregation happened in my own school by my father, but then also, the slave history that we end up uncovering, I was prepared for that to be in the Deep South. And again, on the street that we grew up on. So, I mean, that's the thing that really, one of the significant takeaways from the process, even go back to your first question, is that history is not so far away, and it continues to affect, our present and undoubtedly our future. Absolutely.
Thank you for those reflections. We have a couple of questions. So I'm going to pull out one. So here's one. Does it seem like the culture and worship at Fairhaven is a mixture of white church and the Black church, or more of a meeting together into a combination, combined culture? So what's it like? So what is Fairhaven like? Is it a blending of cultures? Is it more one culture than the other? Let's hear about that a little bit.
As far as I am concerned with Fairhaven, Fairhaven is my home. Fairhaven is my family, not only on Sunday, but every day of the week. It's for Bible study, it's for prayer night. Fairhaven is a combination of all races, which is what I love, because I didn't have the opportunity to go to an integrated school, so therefore I didn't have the opportunity to know other cultures. So now I have the opportunity to go to church and learn from other from other cultures exactly what it's like, what type of food they like, where they like to go, because until we merged, the three churches merged and went together at Fairhaven, I did not know an outside world from the Black church. And when the three churches merged and we went together and found out that there were white people that could sing gospel music where I played the piano. There were white people that could say amen, where we weren't used to that, so it was really something different for me to observe and be able to sit at the piano and look back and see white people swaying along with Black people. And I'm like, this is really nice. So it's something to look forward to me on Sunday morning.
It's interesting. I laugh because it's kind of like Fairhaven has created its own culture. That it's a kind of blending of parts of the African-American experience in terms of church, part of the white experience of the church, but also there's some blending in terms of people who come from different denominations. And so we bring all of that into the mix. And what we create is not just church, but I guess it's what people might call home.
Yes,
it's a place where I can go and I can feel comfortable in terms of worship, that I can see myself represented in the leadership. I can see myself represented in the music. Now, it may not necessarily always sound the way I want it to sound, okay? But the opportunity is there for me to express myself. And I think part of what Fairhaven has done intentionally throughout the years is that in terms of the leadership of the congregation, from pastoral leadership into lay leadership, there's been a diverse group of folk who've been there. And so there have been white pastors, African-American men, African-American women, Asian pastors. So you bring in all of that diversity as part of the congregation, but also understanding that the culture that is Fairhaven is not necessarily the culture that all folk necessarily want to be a part of. And so in some ways, Fairhaven has created its own legacy kind of going forward.
And I think the important part of that is the intentionality behind it. And we talk about this a little bit in the film. You know, Sam Adams talks about, you know, they didn't sit like this, they sat like this, right? And it wasn't, they weren't okay with that. And they said, okay, we're going to have a black and white lead for every committee. We're going to be intentional about, you know, the ministers that we choose. We're going to be intentional about the music that we have. We're going to make sure that there's a gospel choir. We're going to make sure that there's representation. And so, you know, some churches just say, okay, we're integrated, and then don't do the work to stay integrated. And so when you're sitting in the pew, you need to see yourself represented in the choir, in the pulpit, in the leadership. And so it takes intentionality. And I would love actually for Aunt Esther to talk a little bit about how it wasn't easy at the beginning and some of those conversations, some of those hard conversations that had to be had to get to where we are today, where it really does feel like a family.
Yeah, I want to hear more about the early days, because I can't wait till we can go back in public spaces, because I'm going to come to church one Sunday, because I've never been in a church that looked like that.
Well,
so, and Esther, can you tell us a little bit about those early days? And Reverend Jerry, I heard you and your dad had a little butting heads on what to do about merging those churches. So I want to hear these stories from the early days.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, actually, I was one of the younger ones, you know, to merge in with Fairhaven. So therefore, I do not have as many stories probably that, you know, Jerry has probably heard more stories from his father than I actually know, because when I went up there to church, everything just seemed fine to me. So I really don't have any stories that I really need to talk about. So I have to turn that over to Jerry.
Thank you. So you have to understand that there was a conflict between my dad and myself over whether or not to merge the congregations. And I understand where my dad was coming from, because his family, our family, had vested themselves in Pleasant View. His grandfather was one of the persons who put up the money to purchase the land. And so Dad, as a trustee, as a treasurer, was very vested in that property and in making certain that that legacy would continue. There was concern about, so what happens if we merge? What if it doesn't work? We've lost all of this. Also, the sense of, will I be respected? Will my gifts, my talents be able to be used within that congregation? But and so Dad grew up in kind of a segregated school, a segregated society. My situation was a little different, because I grew up from 5th grade on in a situation where schools were integrated. and so had interacted with people of who were white, who were Asian, different backgrounds. And so with that being the situation in school, I was saying, so how come the church, where we're supposed to have the love of God, how come the church is not integrated? And so for me, it was a way that we needed to be going forward, that we needed to come together. And so my dad and I disagreed on that. And I remember the Sunday that a group of us went up to what was McDonald Chapel, and we joined, and felt really good about that until I got home and got that look from Dad. Didn't have to touch you, just kind of looked at you, and it's kind of like it's kind of like, what did you do that for? And it was, it was tense. But I also have to say that my dad eventually became a member at Fairhaven, and it happened as a result of him coming to the realization that his gifts, his graces, his skills would be valued at Fairhaven.
Right.
And I think one of the things that happened, he ended up building, there was a mailbox that was needed for the church, for all of the officers to have their mail put in. And the pastor asked him to build that. And so there was a sense of, yeah, my skills are needed, that I am valued, to the point where later on, when Fellowship Lane was about to be paved, a relationship had developed between the pastor and Dad, so that to the point where Dad was then able to ask the pastor to come down to county government and testify so that the road would be paved. And so what was at one time a relationship that was kind of negative, he had been brought on board and felt as though this was his home also, that the church had become his home. And so the tension that was between us eventually subsided. And I believe that he believed that it was a good choice. However, he did not give up his responsibility in terms of the preservation of the Pleasant View Historic Site, because he wanted to hold on to that legacy. He wanted to be certain that that story was told. And so it was like, yes, I'm a member of Fairhaven, but I need to make certain that who we are and our history is preserved, because there's a story that needs to be told.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Now, I have a question from the chat. So this one is from a parent of a 9 and 11-year-old. And they just wanted to know, what's a good age for children to watch this movie?
Yeah, let me just say, I'm getting messages on my phone from people who just chimed in and said, "You're not talking that much. Why?" And my reaction is like, what a joy it is to be able to bring my family to the audience, and I can just sit and listen to all of you so much. It really is a joy. Daria, thank you so much for the question, and thank you for your support. You've been a great friend throughout this whole process. I think starting the children early on a film like this, it's fine. I think that there are going to be different messages and different presentations and takeaways for young people at different ages. I think this is a wonderful plug for the work that we're doing with the In Your Backyard series. So one of the reasons why Keisha and I made the film, in addition to wanting to tell this story of our own history, was to inspire others to look in their own backyards and try to understand why their street name is named what it is and what's their own family background. And so there are pieces of that you can work with your young people to engage in history and build empathy. I have done a program with high school students where we've engaged with different people, where they've done the interviewing, where they've held the cameras, where they've actually learned the skill sets to engage in filmmaking. And so at different ages, I think that there are different lessons that you can take away. And in all ages, the underlying theme here is that, that we want to view each other with dignity, respect, with love, with value and worth. And I think that that those are messages that are never too early to start sharing with our young.
Thank you, Jason. Now, Keisha, I know you have a little crew at your house. Do you have anything to add in terms of watching? What's a good age for kids to engage in a film like this?
Yeah, I mean, so I've got a 5, 10, and 13-year-old. So I've got those different ages. And, I definitely think a middle school population, middle school age child, can watch this without any hesitation. And I think probably your upper elementary kids can too. And it's more about, I think, how ready you are to have the conversation with them than it is about their ability to understand what's going on in the film. I think, and so in sharing it with them, being ready to talk about how things used to be. And I think there's sometimes a hesitation to have those conversations, to have that dinner table conversation about, segregation and how things used to be. I think sometimes parents are hesitant. We don't know the right thing to say, or what should we say, or should we even bring it up? But your kids have questions, and they have questions about race. The N-word came up in a classroom when one of my sons was in first grade, right? So these conversations are out there, and you want to be the one who's helping to shape the narrative. So educate yourself, and then be ready to educate your children. There's no right time. And if they're bringing it to you, then that means it's probably you've waited too long.
Right. And thank you, Keisha, for that, because, it is set in the context for kids as you watch films like this, pausing and having that conversation. Because what I find, kids want to talk about these things. It's just that we silence the conversations. And so be open to it. You won't know everything. And pause as you go and have conversations about what kids are seeing. I see another question in the chat from Timothy Warner. And he says, the church played a role in both supporting racism and inequity and trying to solve these problems. What is the role of the church in implementing anti-racist policies and in building an equitable community in 2021?
So, if I may, I think part of that is first of all, engaging in the conversation, that there needs to be an opportunity for people to do some soul searching for themselves in terms of, am I racist? Am I anti-racist? And that happens. And I believe that this film is a vehicle by which that conversation can begin. Once one begins to look at the film and see the inequities that are there, not just in terms of the community, but also in terms of what was happening within the church. And then one can begin to address those inequities. People can begin to come together and say, so how can we, as a community of faith, begin to address these issues related to social justice that need to take place? But in order for those steps to be taken, people first of all must be able to sit down and have that conversation, to get proximate with one another, to build a relationship with one another, which then results in people trusting one another enough to move forward, to take steps to bring about that action. I referenced earlier the relationship that my dad was then able to establish with the pastor, where at first he was reticent about coming to the church. And over time, he began to build a relationship with the pastor where he was later able to say, will you come and testify in order that we're able to get this road in? So there was a relationship that had been built so that one could move forward in terms of working against the system where there were racist policies that were in place.
I might just add, because I know that there's some questions about how the film is being used. I saw a question about MCPS, and Troy, I'll let you go deeper on that. But Dad and I have used the film in part, in reaction to your question, Tim, to have these conversations with churches about what it means to be an anti-racist church. So this conversation it's not theoretical, it's very practical, and it's happening. And I think, to put even a finer point on it, the church has to really wrestle with the history that you're talking about, to recognize the role that they played. The reality is 3 churches here existed because of ideas around slavery and race, right? The African American, we'll put it this way, there was a northern church and a southern church. That distinction itself was over race. And then in that instance, even the northern church didn't want the black church, and there was separation there. So just the existence of this merger coming together represents a history and a legacy of racism, slavery, and segregation that has to be grappled with. There has to be that, there can't be truth without the reconciliation component. And so, that involves history, it involves wrestling with it, but we're using the film to really be a mirror where people can look in the mirror, look at the film, and have conversations about the film when they're really having conversations about themselves, and asking questions about the film that are really asking questions about themselves, their history, and how they can move forward. And then I'll speak really briefly to what we're doing with MCPS. So Troy's been an advocate for utilization of the film within the school system. So we're working with some specialists within MCPS to develop curricula to make the film available both to high school and middle school students, as well as to allow the film to be used in professional development. When we think about identity and the intersectionality of that identity, to use the film in that context as well. So thank you for that question.
And absolutely, I mean, because the story tells, when we talk about anti-racism, one of the things is sharing power or yielding power, so that everyone can see themselves in a space. So that's what really inspired me as we do this anti-racism work in Montgomery County Public Schools. The themes throughout show us that that it can be done, that it's possible, and it's through conversation and very intentional actions, because what you all did was very intentional. It wasn't haphazard, because if it were, the church, I would imagine, would look very different. Keisha, I saw you on mute.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you can't skip the hard part. I think a lot of folks want to just get to the integration, just get to the happy Sunday morning, right, where everybody's singing in the choir together. But you have to do some of that hard work. You have to do some of that difficult conversation. You have to do some of that introspection, and what was my role to play in this, or what was my great-great-grandfather's role to play in this, and that can be hard. And that's why, maybe why that slavery part was left out of that family history skeleton. That was the hard part to talk about. And so, as much as we want to jump to the end and everything's happy and we're integrated and the school, everybody looks great, if you don't do that hard part, then people feel like they're not represented and they feel like their voice isn't getting heard. And so, finding that balance there.
That was one of the things that Sister Pearl said in the film. She said, we just didn't talk about it. There were certain things that you just didn't talk about.
Yeah. And it's funny how that changes. Every family is a little bit different. Because I grew up in a house, they talked about it all the time. And, so every family is really different. And so, but having these conversations are so important. Now, one of the scenes that touched me was a scene where you all found, you were searching your roots, and you found your enslaved relatives. And so I think there was the question in the chat, were you able to find out any more information since filming?
Yeah, so that was a pretty emotional moment. Thank you for raising it. And let me say thank you to a colleague who's listening in, Tony Cohen, who was in that scene and helped out a lot with, and is really, a testament here in Montgomery County and a treasure, but helped out in that research. Let me just put it this way. The story's not over, and we'll keep you on the hook with that. So there's more to come regarding what we've uncovered and how we are connected to this community here in Montgomery County.
Jason, are you trying to drop Finding Fellowship?
Exactly. You stay tuned. Go to Finding Fellowship. Without Phil, make sure we got your information because we will. There's more to come on that story. So it's a great one.
I didn't know.
Well,
What was that? Esther?
trained well, Jason.
Exactly. My aunt taught me right.
I didn't know that, I'd be part of late breaking news. So, what was I going to say? Y'all have me cutting up. The idea, another thing that just resonated with me was that idea of being a doer. And so as we think about the current state of the world and all that we've endured over the last couple of years, what should doers be doing? How can we do something that will help push us forward? Because goodness knows people were trying to push us back for the last several years, even harder than normal. What should doers do?
Let me jump in really quickly and give context so that they can answer the hard part of that question. So for those that don't know the story, early on in this process, Grandma was telling me about Pleasant View. And she told me about Gary Green and how 3 years after the end of slavery, they helped build a schoolhouse for the education of Black children. Being my lawyerly self from DC, I thought, there's a lot of liability there. That doesn't seem like the safest. Surely there was a more inconspicuous. Why would they? She cut me off and she said, Jason, the Black kids in the community needed a school. There was no public education. The people in the community, your great-great-grandfather included, looked around, they saw a need, and they took action because doers do. And it was one of the most profound and simple statements I'd ever heard. And I knew that I wanted to be part of the doer class that we were a legacy of. And so that's the frame. And let me turn it over to Dad and Keisha and Aunt Esther to talk about what our doers should actually be doing.
So what should doers be doing? Doers should be filming a documentary called Finding Fellowship. And in so doing, creating opportunities for people to tell their story. And in the process of telling their story, finding out what it is they should be doing. I think that what this film does is it inspires people to look at themselves and realize that they're called to do something. And it's not just a matter of sitting back and observing. You need to take action and go forward. Just to share, our bishop said that we need to be taking steps towards becoming an anti-racist church. And as a district superintendent, felt as though I needed to be doing something to invite the churches on my district. And so as a doer, worked with Jason to use this film as a way of inviting congregations to be in conversation around the issue of race and then to be able to move forward. That's what doers do.
Thank you.
Yeah, doers do something. I think it's so easy to get caught up. I got 3 kids, I got a full-time job. It's so easy to get caught up in just the day-to-day of what you're doing, to not take a moment and take your head up and say, could I be doing more? Am I leaving this place better than how I got here? And it doesn't have to be making a full documentary, but it can be at your kids' school PTA. It could be at your church. It can be in your neighborhood. How are you helping people to have those conversations? I love the quote from Martin Luther King, anyone can be great because anyone can serve. And so, if you are in a mind of service and in the mind of being a doer, then you will always know, where you are needed. And so, that's what kind of resonates with me. What can I do? How can I be of service? What am I being called to do here?
Doers do. One of the things that we need to do is to put on our bucket list that we are going to Fairhaven Church when it opens up, so we can see what was produced from those 3 churches that merged on Route 28.
Was that an invitation to Troy?
I will be there.
Yeah,
I'm gonna give you my number so you can call me when y'all are open for business.
okay, all right, Troy.
So, it's that idea we can all do something. And so, Jason, I want to just zoom back in on you because you're doing something at the moment. And so let's hear a little bit about what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And this actually goes to a question that I saw in the chat. I know is sort of permeates through the film. There's this idea of a merger. We had a very candid conversation about the merger, and there's this question about what was lost and what was gained and was it worth it? And Melvin talked about when you bring people together, sometimes you're just watering down the coffee with the cream. And I think it's so important to point out that Fairhaven exists and Pleasant View Historic Site exists. It still stands. The physical site purchased in 1868 for a one-room schoolhouse and a church and a cemetery for $54 in North Potomac. Anyway, that site still stands, and it's a testament to the trustees, of which Aunt Esther and Dad are a part. It's a testament to the community, and really it's a responsibility now that we see it forward for the next 150 years. So part of the intent of finding fellowship is to encourage people to explore their own history. It's to inspire people to get proximate with one another, to stop using terms like us and them and figure out where that collective we is. But the last part is also to shine a light on institutions like Pleasant View and encourage people to support them. My friend Adam Luking would say, doers donate. In addition to doers do, doers donate, because what the Pleasant View Historic Site has lasted this long, large part by the private dedication of individuals like Dad and Aunt Esther, and sort of this generation that's Keisha and myself and our cousins Pam and Darlene who are chiming in on the chat. It's our responsibility to make sure that this site is able to exist and persist for the next 150 years, because this is where roots went deep in the Quince Orchard soil. It's where seeds were planted in education and in religion and in sanctuary. It's where people were restored and empowered. And it's also where reconciliation happened. And so we're in the midst of this really important campaign. It's part of why Docs in Progress and Blackrock so generously partnered with us to raise awareness of this effort to complete $1 million raise to stabilize the historic site, the schoolhouse and the church building. And for anyone that wants to be a part of that effort, by all means, please support at pleasantviewsite.org. /donate. You'll see a wonderful video of Dad talking about the history there. And it's what the rest of the series is also going to be about. It's why we're engaging students to tell their history and be connected to place. And it's why we're having that April 11th celebration to really commemorate those individuals that have gotten us to this point, to ensure that this memorial continues to exist going forward.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you, Esther. And thank you, Reverend Jerry. And thank you, Keisha. You all have made my evening, and I'm leaving with 3 things. Esther is going to invite me to church.
Yes, I am.
I want to be in y'all's next family reunion.
Okay.
All right.
We're going to make some do or do t-shirts.
All right.
And just remember, audience, doers donate. So, Angela, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and thank you all for sharing the evening with us and your story.
Thank you, Troy.
Thank you, Troy.
You've been amazing.
Message to you. You've been wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was wonderful. I'm sure you can't hear it, but there's a virtual applause. And Miriam, if you could put Keelan up here on screen with me too. Wasn't that amazing?
Yes, I have so many thoughts to share, but I'll just get to the point that, we're just so thankful to Jason and Troy and Esther and Jerry and Keisha tonight to come together and share just a small bit of what the film is about and their conversations. We actually, something we haven't mentioned is that we have 4 full-length interviews with Esther Jerry, Ida Pearl, and Tompkins Hallman on the Blackrock YouTube channel. I've watched each of them about 4 times through. It is really, really inspiring. So if you want to learn more about these individuals, go to the Blackrock Center YouTube channel and sit down with your family and just keep learning more and more. I think a lot of viewers are feeling really inspired by the conversation tonight. It's easy to be inspired. And as Keisha mentioned, many parents are hesitant to engage in these topics with their kids. But I hope we can all feel a little more confident and move forward in creating a safe space for these discussions in our own homes. And on behalf of Blackrock, we are so honored to support the film and be involved in producing the events. It really is such a joy. And I think Amanda Moskowitz, our marketing director, I think she's included the link again in the chat room to go to the Finding Fellowship series website. Go ahead, go there right now. I'm gonna direct everyone to click on that link. Go to the website right now. Go support Pleasant View Historical Association. Go register your students for the incredible filmmaking workshop. We've also provided on the website a whole lot of incredible educational content so that educators and families can continue the conversations at home. And definitely don't forget to RSVP for the April 11th online reception and fundraiser. It's going to be a wonderful, joyous, entertaining, fulfilling event, and we don't want anybody to miss out. Go ahead and take care of all of those things right now while they're on your mind, while you're here with us. And yeah, thank you, Angela. Thank you, and Miriam, and the whole Docs in Progress team. Thank you to the viewers who are watching and sharing and supporting at 8:30 on a Tuesday night. This is the way the world is right now. So we're all zoomed out a bit, but thank you for choosing to be here tonight with us. I can't say thank you enough. It's just really special. So,
you know, definitely. I think in times of Zoom, we still had a huge turnout. So yes, I'm going to echo that. Thank you. We had over 300 plus tickets.
I'm guilty of seeing friends post performances online, and I'm just like, oh, not another one. Like, I can't bear it. You know, it's just so much on the computer. But again, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight and keep supporting us. This is just the beginning of the series. So we have so much more, and we don't want people to miss out.
For sure. And before you leave us, I promise you 2 gift cards. Real quick, we're going to give this away. Miriam, can you share my screen? So there's a very not complicated website called wheelofnames.com. I copied and pasted everybody's name. So there's 345 names here. My first drawing, $40 gift certificate to Spice Street Indian Restaurant in Silver Spring, Maryland, courtesy of John Silky, which is our sponsor for the Dinner and the Dock Initiative. All right. Drum roll. You can't really hear it. It is spinning. You can't hear the spinning sound, but here we go. And the winner is, anticipation's killing me, Tiffany Hagler. And I just need to write this down. Tiffany, I have your email, so I will email you about that. All right. And then we have the second. So Tiffany, you won a $40 gift card, and now our second one. Here we go. This is for $25. All right, slow spin. And the winner is Brandy. All right, Brandy, I have your email, so I know exactly what Brandy this is. All right, thanks again. Thanks to our sponsor, John. And, you know, Dinner Dock, again, is meant to support local restaurants. The Silver Screen series is a monthly screening with Docs in Progress, so feel free to check us out for next month's screening. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Many blessings. Y'all stay safe. We'll see you next time. Bye.